And hello, folks. Welcome back to the Nerd National Communication Center. I'm Mike, and it is Friday, October 23rd, 2020, and it's time for another edition of the Nerd News. In this edition, we're going to get some more information on how Nvidia plans to handle the acquisition of ARM. Intel continues to struggle, and it just doesn't seem like it'd be a nerd news unless I had an article about how AT&T is continuing to go downhill. So let's get into it. Well, first up on the tech news this week, Quibi, we hardly knew you. Yes, another unicorn bites the dust. Quibi, with less than 1 year of being in existence, has gone belly up. In the end, they were probably victims of COVID-19, but probably, if you really think about it, nobody wanted to pay them $5 a month or $8 a month for what they had to offer, or at least not nearly enough people to keep them in business. So you can read the full article over at Ars Technica if you want. Next up on the Tech Report, also at Ars Technica, is more information on what Nvidia is planning to do once they have purchased ARM. ARM is the single largest, most popular CPU design in the world, used on all smartphones, tablets, and soon Macintosh computers. Encouragingly, Nvidia is saying the right things. Nvidia says that as part of Nvidia, ARM will continue to operate its open licensing model while maintaining the global customer neutrality that has been foundational to its success. On a conference call following the deal, ARM CEO Simon Segars also reiterated, "We will maintain our neutral business model and keep a level of independence." Now that's a good thing because it didn't become the most popular CPU design in the entire world by being proprietary. Of note, ARM will be moving from a Japanese-owned company to an American-owned company, and that could very well worry the Chinese more with potentials of trade wars and sanctions against Chinese companies. But you can read the full article over at Ars Technica. Next, over at Bleeping Computer, we've got an article about my favorite search engine, DuckDuckGo. This is a privacy-focused, a privacy-oriented web search engine. Now, it uses Bing as kind of its back end for searching, but it does not track you like Google does. That's why I don't like to use google.com for searching anymore. It's been my experience that you can probably do about 95% of your searches on DuckDuckGo, and then sometimes when you're just trying to get slightly better results for something that's a little more obscure, you might have to break down and go to Google. Now, DuckDuckGo announced that in August 2020, they ended with over 2 billion total searches. Now, that sounds really amazing, but that is only about 2% of the search market. But you can see their traffic has been growing rapidly. And I would really recommend that you check into DuckDuckGo and consider making it your search engine. You can read the full article over at Bleeping Computer. And speaking of privacy, once again back over at Ars Technica, we've got a breakdown of the new security features in iOS version 14, making it the most mobile secure operating system ever. Let's take a look at some of the changes that have happened. Well, first up, Apple has added a small little icon to show you when an app is using your camera or using your audio. And you can actually track that by bringing up your notification screen, and it will tell you the last app that used, for instance, in this example, Tuner Pro used the microphone. Let's see what else. Photos are no longer all or nothing. You're not giving an app access to your entire camera roll, but maybe just a folder, or more specific parts can remain hands off. I think importantly, it's going to tell you or ask you when an app wants to connect to your local network and see what devices might be on your network. So you can control this as well now. It's not happening behind the curtain. You can say how finely you want your location data to be handed out to the apps. You can make it blur it basically so it's not exact. Copy and paste notification. There are some ill-mannered apps that will look to see what is on your clipboard when they really have no reason to do that. And they've added some other things: compromised password notifications, better privacy with Wi-Fi by randomizing your MAC address that's going out from your phone, and you would turn that on by saying I want a private address, which just means it's randomizing. The same MAC address is not going to wireless access points all the time, and that makes it harder for the players that would like to track you to track you. You're also going to get more information on the trackers on websites, which is good. All of this is very good. But you can read the full article over at Ars Technica, and it just seems like a few companies are realizing that privacy is a feature that can be sold. It seems that Firefox, DuckDuckGo, and Apple are more interested in privacy than, for instance, Google. Next article is over at NAND Tech, and it wouldn't be tech news. I'd have to have at least one article talking about the new Apple iPhones. They're stronger, they're faster, they're better. Well, they kind of look the same, but as predicted, they have a better CPU. The A14 is faster.
Atomic batteries to power, turbines to speed.
And the high-end model, at least, has a better camera. Now, there are articles all over the net on the new iPhone 12s. It seems like they might be just a little bit cheaper because they have bumped up the minimum amount of storage, so it's not quite as expensive. And you can read the full thing over at Anand Tech. Enough said. And following up on iPhone 12s, over at Extreme Tech, we have an article regarding Apple booking up the entire fab capacity at TSMC to make A14 CPUs for their new phones. And they have been stepping down in processing node capacity and may very well be going to 5 nanometer very soon on the iPhone silicon. Now, currently Apple is still at 7 nanometers, but basically the closer you put the components together, the more you can get on one chip, so the more horsepower you can have. So just a quick mention here of the battles for fab production. It's even been said that Intel is looking to book 7 nanometer production at TSMC because their own 7 nanometer production has fallen woefully behind schedule. Next up is another article over at Ars Technica, which is a cautionary tale about plugins, extensions to your web browser. So the story goes like this. You have a good, very good ad blocker for web browsers in the Google Chrome store. However, the developer sells his ad blocker to another company, and since it already has 300,000 installs, the people that bought it made an update that added malicious code. So this is a vector to get bad actors onto your computer, is not to try to get you to download the extension, but to buy somebody's popular extension and then modify it so it has bad behavior. This is why I do not do plugins of any type or extensions of any type on my web browsers. You can read all the details over at Ars Technica. Take my advice and just don't do that. So it just doesn't seem like it would be a tech news unless I didn't have an article about the slow motion train wreck that is the downward slide of AT&T. So AT&T is phasing out its outdated DSL technology and moving towards fiber, but their fiber rollout program has been extremely curtailed because they are so saddled with debt that they've had to restrict the program of rolling out this new technology. You can read it all here. There is some hybrid fiber to the household where the last run to the house is still copper wire, but AT&T has got itself into a world of hurt with all its debt, and they're even looking to sell DirecTV, which they have done nothing but run into the ground. You can read all the details here at Ars Technica, and it is not pretty. If you're a follower of all things tech, you probably want to bookmark this page at Backblaze. Backblaze is an online backup service, but they use consumer hard drives to back up their clients' data. And what makes them interesting is they publish the data failure rates of all the hard drives they use. And you can see that for the third quarter of 2020, the average hard drive failure rate of their hard drives is under 1%, which is extremely good. If you've looked at this in the past, there were years where, for instance, some of the 3 terabyte Seagate hard drives had a 30 or 40% failure rate. You definitely didn't want to own that model of Seagate. Now, every single hard drive maker at one time or another has had a bum design in hard drives. So you can't necessarily say, I will never buy a Seagate hard drive again because they had this bad model, blah, 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 years ago. Seagate's had it, Western Digital has had it, Hitachi HGST has had it, which is now owned by Western Digital, I believe. Toshiba, they've all at one time or another had a bad design flaw in their hard drives that doesn't come out till later. But it is nice that they kind of kiss and tell at Backblaze because we can follow these failure rates over time and see who's doing well. These failure rates are annualized. This is the percentage of hard drives that are dying in 1 year. And for magnetic drives less than 3 years old, these are incredibly good numbers. Now you can see there is some difference. Seagate is still a little bit higher on some of their models, but some of their newer, larger models are doing better. But if this is something you'd like to follow, you can check it out over at Backblaze. Another article over at NAND Tech talking about Intel selling its NAND memory business. These are the chips that run memory sticks and SSD drives. And this is a continuation of Intel shedding business units because they are struggling. You may remember they sold their cellular modem, the chips that would connect to a cellular network, to Apple, and now they're selling their NAND business. Intel is not performing and is struggling, so they may just be trying to concentrate more on their core business of making CPU chips and chipsets. But you can read the full article over at NAND Tech. Last up, continuing to talk about this theme with Intel, in 2016, AMD Intel's major competitor held about 18% of the market. If you look at the latest information, AMD is now close to 37% of the market, and their latest generation, AMD's latest generation of Ryzen chips, the Ryzen 5000s, are very strong and are going to continue to give Intel great trouble. And this is just so strange to me to be talking about AMD having the upper leg on Intel, because for so many years you felt more like Intel kind of had its foot on the throat of AMD and just kind of lifted it up enough to keep the company alive so that Intel would not be accused of being a monopoly. But now AMD is performing and continuing to come out with very compelling products, and it's really pushing Intel back on its heels, especially as Intel is having trouble moving to the smaller and smaller fab processes, to the point where they're actually considering going outside their own chip fabrication factories to have their chips produced down at 7 nanometers because they cannot do it themselves at this time. So it's just very, very interesting to see this change. Now, the elephant in the room, though, is Apple moving its Macintoshes, which traditionally used Intel CPUs, to ARM CPUs. So Apple is going to design its own CPUs to use in its Macintosh line now, and will no longer use Intel at all. And this could very well spread to the Windows world, to the general purpose laptops. So overall, in the long term, this could be very bad for Intel and AMD. Now, that's the last article I got for this week's tech news, and I appreciate you coming and watching this. If you'd like to get updates in your box, please like and subscribe and hit that bell. Take care.